The auction yard smelled of dust, wet rope, and old hay. Men in seed caps stood along the rails with their coffee cups braced in both hands, grinning before the laughter even started. Into that ring came 340 alpacas, necks high, ears cocked, fleece tossing in the dry wind like scraps of storm cloud. And there, planted at the front rail in her black church shoes, stood Lenora Kincaid, 72 years old, chin lifted, bidding as if she were buying bolts of calico instead of a sea of long-lashed animals nobody in Drewsey had asked for. Auctioneer could hardly keep his voice steady. Folks slapped the boards. One fellow bent double and wheezed into his sleeve. Lenora never once smiled. She raised 2 fingers, nodded, raised them again. By the time the hammer fell, the whole yard had gone noisy with delight at her foolishness. Then came the sight that chilled a few of them quiet. She had brought trucks. Not 1, 5. She had halters, mineral tubs, ledger paper, and a boy with fence pliers waiting by the gate. Lenora Kincaid was not buying a joke. She was arriving at an appointment the rest of them had failed to notice. If tailies of stubborn country people and improbable turnarounds are welcome company where you are, subscribe before we go further. And leave a note telling me what corner of the world you're listening from tonight. Because far out in Harney County, Oregon, where the land lies open and plain words matter more than polished ones, Drewsey was about to watch a widow do something so strange, so costly, and so deliberate that even the wind seemed to pause over it. Drewsey sat low and spare beneath a broad Oregon sky, the kind of place where a pickup half a mile away could be known by its engine note. Sage lay silver on the flats. The creek ran mean in August. Fence posts leaned with the patience of old men. The Kincaid place stood east of town, a weather-grayed spread of pasture, ditch, hay shed, and one long seed barn left from better years. Lenora's husband, Chet, had raised sheep there once, then cattle. Then nothing much at all after drought shaved the grass down to stubble, and grief thinned the rest. By the summer she bought the alpacas. Lenora lived with her grandson Asa, who had shoulders broadening into manhood and the tired eyes of someone who had learned figures too young. His mother, Lenora's daughter, was buried on the hill above the church. His father had drifted south with a drilling crew and never planted himself anywhere again. So it was Lenora and Asa at the enamel kitchen table each night, sorting bills under the yellow lamp. Diesel, feed, irrigation repair. And always that folded letter from Cedar Basin Mutual, opened so many times the creases had turned white. The letter was plain enough. Reduce the fire load around the insured structures and access lanes within 21 days, or the policy would not be renewed. No policy meant more than worry. It meant the fuel supplier in Burns could freeze their line of credit. It meant the hay buyer would refuse a fall contract on uninsured storage. It meant the old baler and the wheel line might go to auction before the first hard frost. Drewsey understood that kind of threat. What it did not understand was why Lenora answered it by buying 340 alpacas, with the last of Chet's dispersal money. At Orrin Sibley's feed store, the jokes rolled easy as marbles. Orrin himself leaned both forearms on the counter and said, "Lenora, a body could buy seed, gravel, or plain sense with that sum. You bought eyelashes." Twyla Haskett, who never missed a chance to hold another family up to the light, peered through the window at the first truck unloading and clucked her tongue. "Looks like a parade for fools." Even Fire Marshal Nevin Cruz, who had come with hazard maps under his arm, gave the place one long stare and asked whether she had mistaken Harney County for a petting zoo. Yet inside the Kincaid house, the rhythm of life held to old habits. Lenora rose before dawn and set biscuits in the oven with the same small, exact motion she had used for 40 years. She snapped beans on the back step at dusk. She saved twine in a blue coffee tin. Once, when Asa came in late from changing ditch water, he found her at the cedar chest with one of Chet's old wool cards in her lap, rubbing her thumb over the bent teeth. "Your granddad used to say an animal earns its keep 2 or 3 ways if you look close enough," she murmured, then shut the lid before Asa could ask more. The morning after the auction, Lenora did not admire the herd. She measured. She walked the place with a surveyor's patience, hammering willow stakes into the dirt in long, curved lines around the barn, the hay shed, the propane tank, and the irrigation ditch. She sent Asa to town for reels of poly wire, more step-in posts, and every stock trough Orrin had in the yard. By noon, the first strip of pasture had been fenced so narrow it looked mean. The alpacas went in shoulder to shoulder, nibbling with their soft split mouths, not tearing, not trampling, just shaving the cheatgrass lower and lower. "You aim to graze the whole ranch with them?" Asa asked that evening, watching a gray female work a patch clean as clippers. Lenora tightened a knot with her teeth and said, "Not the whole ranch, only what matters first." "What matters first?" She looked past him toward the seed barn, its dry board silver in the slant light. A match don't care how hard a widow prayed over a building. It only asks what's lying at the door. That was all she gave him. Then she rattled the grain bucket, and the herd drifted after her like a low white tide, bells beginning to answer the dusk. Folks came just to watch the absurdity of it. Boys parked on the shoulder and laughed each time an alpaca hummed. Twyla brought her sister one afternoon and stood with both hands on her hips while Lenora shifted the fencing another 20 feet. 340 fancy next to mow weeds, she called. Could have hired boys with scythes for less. Lenora never raised her head. "Boys get tired," she said. "Alpacas do too." "Not of grass." There was no sermon in her voice, just the plain scrape of steel posts, the splash of trough water, and a woman making a shape in the land that nobody else could yet read. Soon the place began to change in ways even Asa could not ignore. Around each building, the high yellow tinder disappeared into wide, cropped bands. Then Lenora pushed the herd farther out in ribbons that curled with the wind and crossed at odd angles between the ditch and the rise. She kept a county plat map on the truck seat, blue pencil marks thick as veins over every acre. At night, she sat under the porch light mending halters and clipping small brass bells to selected lead animals. "Why the bells?" Asa asked. Lenora smiled faintly. "So I can hear if the pattern slips in the dark." On the 7th day, Nevin Cruz came by with a new notice. Lightning storms were expected early. Cedar Basin had advanced the reinspection by 5 days. Asa read the date and felt the blood go out of him. They were nowhere near done. The outer pasture still stood thick and yellow. The west lane to the barn was choked with cheatgrass tall enough to whisper against a truck axle. Nevin folded the paper against his palm and said, not unkindly, "Mrs. Kincaid, I need access, clearance, and a survivable perimeter. Right now I see livestock theater." Lenora signed for the notice, tucked it into her apron, and went back to moving fence. That same week, the setback came hard. A freight order of extra posts and line from Burns never arrived. Then a dry thunder squall rolled off the hills and snapped 2 lengths of poly wire, sending 40 alpacas ghosting into the alfalfa. One male tangled himself in the wheel line. Another spat at Asa till he nearly laughed from pure despair. By dark they had the herd gathered, but the map looked impossible. Asa found Lenora in the barn doorway, shoulders bowed at last, one hand braced against the frame. For the first time he thought he saw surrender in her. Then she straightened, spat dust, and asked for bolt cutters. What followed was not dramatic. It was older than drama. Lenora dragged out Chet's stack of rusted sheep panels, clipped them apart, and wired them into shorter sections by lantern light. She cut every sound board from a broken lambing pen that could serve as a drift gate. She sent Asa to Kester Van, captain of the volunteer fire crew, not for pity but for discarded flagging tape. By midnight, red strips were snapping all over the pasture like bits of warning. "Grandma," Asa said, sore to the elbows, "what if it still isn't enough?" Lenora fed wire through wire and answered, "Then it'll be more than standing still." From then on, they worked by hours most folks slept through. Before sunrise, the bells would start, thin and silvery, and Asa would see his grandmother moving through the dim like a ship's lamp, guiding the lead animals from one narrow corridor to the next. By noon, a fresh band of grass lay close-cropped behind them. By supper, another. The alpacas learned her whistle. They learned the shake of the grain scoop, the lift of her arm, the places where the ditch curved and the sage opened. What had looked ridiculous from the road began, from above, to resemble something deliberate: lanes, pockets, curves, and crossings. Still, she did odd things no one could account for. She cleaned the old seed barn from end to end, swept the loft, oiled the pulley over the shearing table Chet had not used in years. She laid burlap on the floor and stacked baling twine in neat coils. Twice Asa caught her sorting the alpacas by fleece, running her fingers through the crimp with a practiced eye. "You planning to become a spinner now?" he asked. Lenora shut the pen latch, planning to remain a Kincaid. That answer settled nothing, but it told Asa the herd was not merely a shield. Somewhere under her silence, another door was waiting. Orrin Sibley came out with a load of mineral blocks and stood at the gate longer than he meant to. The crop strips now ringed the house and barn in widening swales of pale earth and short green stubble. Beyond them, untouched cheatgrass still shimmered waist-high. "Looks like quilting from the ridge," he admitted. "Then maybe the Lord made a prairie for women who sow," Lenora said. Orrin scratched his jaw. "You truly think this'll satisfy Cedar Basin?" Lenora tipped water into a trough until it brimmed. "I'm not courting Cedar Basin. I'm courting August." That put a hush on him, though he tried not to show it. The evening before inspection, the light came coppery and mean. Even the swallows flew low. Asa stood on the rise and saw what Lenora had made at last: great curved grazed lanes arcing around every structure, joining the ditch to the bare yard, then crossing again farther out where wind might shove flame sideways. The herd was settled in the last outer strip, heads down, bells soft as spoon taps. Lenora stood with both hands on the hood of the truck, staring west where clouds were building in bruised blue piles. "Bring the hoses nearer the barn," she said, "and fill every trough twice." She did not speak again until the first lightning flashed. It struck on the Blevin place a mile off. One white jab, then a bloom of orange in the cheatgrass, low at first, almost pretty in the twilight. Pretty lasted less than a minute. Wind got under it and the fire began to run, flattening itself and then rising, a red sheet moving on black legs. Sirens started in town. Doors slammed. Kester Van's brush truck came hard up the county road throwing gravel. Asaph felt his mouth go dry. Across the pasture, the alpacas bunched and turned their narrow faces toward the glow. Lenora opened the inner gate, shook grain once, and drew them deeper behind the first cropped lane. Fire reached the edge of the Kincaid, spread in a sound like paper tearing by the acre. It hit the tall grass first and leaped high enough to show its bones. Then it reached the first shaved band the alpacas had left. There the flames lowered, stumbled, and spread flat, searching. Wind shoved them onward. They found a second lane and dropped again. Kester's crew swung in with hoses, able at last to drive close because the access path lay clear to the barn. Men jumped down, boots in black ash, and stared a half-second too long. Around them, Lenora's strange stitched pasture was doing what men with shovels alone could not. One tongue of fire made the west curve and raced for the seed barn anyway. Asa saw it coming and ran with the hose until the line bucked in his hands. Lenora was ahead of him, skirts whipping, opening the ditch gate she had cleared that morning. Water rushed bright and cold across the lowest crop strip. Flame touched it, hissed, crouched, and split. Half slid toward bare ground and died smoking. The other half met another grazed ribbon and dwindled to little nasty fingers. No speeches followed. No expert stepped forward. There were only faces in the flare light, men turning to look from the fire to the alpaca-cut lanes and back again, with disbelief widening into respect. Dawn showed the proof plain as scripture. The Blevin field lay charred nearly to the fence line. A black seam crossed two neighboring pastures, but the Kincaid house stood clean in the thin morning, the seed barn silver and unburned, the hay shed intact, and all around them the curved grazed bands lay like pale brushstrokes in the ash. Cars lined the road. Twyla Haskett came in her robe and work boots, speech gone from her. Orrin removed his cap and kept it in his hand. The Cedar Basin inspector, who had arrived before sunup expecting to confirm a cancellation, walked the perimeter once, folded the non-renewal paper into his coat pocket, and asked for Lenora's renewal address. After that morning, people came with different errands, not to laugh, to ask, could she graze the church lot before September winds? Would she lease 100 head against the school bus garage? Could she cut the cemetery lane the way she'd cut her own west boundary? Kester Van marked problem places on a county map and brought it to her porch. Lenora studied it while the alpacas hummed in the pen. Cedar Basin renewed the policy. The fuel line stayed open. The hay buyer signed. The auctioneer, who had once nearly swallowed his grin, now called twice asking whether she intended to bid again if another lot came up. Then came shearing. Under the old barn rafters, a sow watched fleeces roll off in soft cream sheets, cleaner and finer than most folks in Drewsey had guessed. Lenora graded every bundle with the same care she had once given Chet's wool clips. Orrin hauled the first bales to a mill buyer in Pendleton and came back whistling low at the price. The alpacas had saved the buildings first. Now they were paying their own way and then some. In the evenings, when the bells moved across the far pasture, neighbors no longer smirked from the road. They listened, measuring their own acres with newly humbled eyes. Years later, folks in Harney County would still point toward the Kincaid place when storm season browned the hills and say that was where the old thinking changed. Not because a stranger explained it, and not because Lenora ever stood up to boast. She simply kept moving the herd, mending fence, reading weather, and earning from the same animals twice over. A sow, grown and steady by then, liked to remember her on that first auction day in her black shoes and stubborn jaw, buying what looked absurd to everyone else. The valley had laughed at a field full of long necks. By autumn, it was living inside the safety those small bells had grazed into the grass.